This didn't work too well. I apologize. It's about 10 minutes late, Eastern Standard Time. 10 minutes is anywhere. Anyway, I'm Randy Wong. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Um, I am going to ask you to either chat or ask questions as we speak. That would probably be the easiest for me. If you can see the questions, why don't you look on your right panel and I will answer questions as they arise as you type them. This is scheduled for about an hour, and I see a lot of friends that are already signed in, including Andrea, Bridget, and Chrissy. Those are my assistants at my different offices and my online. We are going to have the FAQs about FOV, which is frequently asked questions. Hold on, John, I can read. And we're going to have frequently asked questions about FOV, floater only vitrectomy. This is the second series of webinars that I've been doing. I'll be repeating them again on January 12th. Since last year, I have started vitrectomyforfloaters.com, and this is a place where I think that we can share objective information about the best ways to treat your floaters. So let's get started. I'm going to ask you, hello, Paul. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and ask questions as they arrive. Again, use the questions area or maybe even the chat, and I will address the questions as best I can. So let's get started. I'm Randy Wong. I'm a retina specialist. I practice in Fairfax, Virginia, in the United States. For a long time, I had my website, retinaeyedoctor.com, but over the last couple of years, I've realized that patients that have floaters really need their own site. Honestly, I felt very uncomfortable about going to other floater forums because those, I think, are really just patient sites, and it's not a proper place for a physician like myself to kind of intrude. So I decided that I should start my own forum, if you will, or website specifically for patients that might have problems with floaters. I'm a retina specialist. I'm also a father of 5. I like Dunkin' Donuts coffee, black please. I love to play tennis, and I hate golf. Got 2 dogs, and my passion is to help raise my kids. I manage several raise several kids with youth hockey and manage their respective teams. So why are you guys here? Many of you have floaters. You have decreased vision due to floaters. It's been a long-lasting problem. It's been a chronic problem. And in my experience, most of you have been discounted and or ridiculed by health experts. You've been told that these things will go away. They're in your head. You've just got to get used to them, etc., etc. The problem is, and which is why we're here tonight, is there's no good, reliable information on the internet or elsewhere as to what to do with floaters. I created vitrectomyforfloaters.com within the last year as a forum, as a website to talk about objectively what treatments are available for you and to answer your questions. And to my word, you will never be discounted here or elsewhere. I've got about 10 or 11 questions that I think are quite pervasive. Again, as you have questions during this webinar, please feel free to ask them. Hey, Ken, haven't heard from you for a long time. First of all, what are floaters? Floaters are any opacity within the vitreous gel which casts a shadow on the retina or blurs vision. It can be due to optical changes within the vitreous which cause the vitreous to refract light differently, causing hazy vision or just spots. The common denominator of any floater is that it must move to and fro with any eye movement. If not, it can't be in the vitreous, and therefore can't be a floater. FOV is not a special operation. FOV stands for floater-only vitrectomy. Another term that I've come across is floaterectomy, but vitrectomy is what most ophthalmologists or retina specialists like myself simply term a vitrectomy. FOV is simply a vitrectomy. A vitrectomy is the basic or core operation that I perform to treat a variety of eye problems, including floaters. It's not a special operation. Instead, it's a routine procedure, not a special procedure, but it's performed for a special circumstance. Can one or two of you just text to see that you can hear me speaking well enough? I'm not getting much feedback here. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. All right. Let me finish this part and we'll start with some questions. Vitrectomy, or FOV, instruments are introduced into the eye. You've got an instrument that cuts away the vitreous and another instrument that gives me illumination. This is the vitreous cutter. This is the illuminator. And this here is a small hose, if you will, that pumps fluid in the eye to keep positive pressure within the eye as I operate. As I said before, by definition, floaters are located in the vitreous. The vitreous is a gel. It's comprised of protein and water. The vitreous is not needed as an adult. Oops. And it's replaced by saline during the operation. Your own saline replaces the fluid supplied during the operation. Eric asked the question, my floater is always centered in my vision, and other ophthalmologists have had trouble seeing it during exams. Does this mean it is close to my retina? And if so, how would this affect the risk of surgery and recover/travel afterwards? The answer to your question, Eric, is that these are not really concerns with vitrectomy. They're more concerns with YAG laser vitreolysis, or the laser that's used to kind of cut or break away the floaters. Because vitrectomy uses suction, we can remove floaters that are even lying on the surface of the retina without fear of causing damage to the vitreous. Scott from Florida asks, last webinar you were against inducing PVD during FOV and didn't think glaucoma isn't a long-term effect possibility. What positions have changed? How come? I'll get to that in just a little bit, Scott. I'm just reading to all the people that chimed in that you can hear me. Finally, positive feedback. Hey, Kitty, how are you? This is great. Got a lot of active energy tonight. Okay, next question is from John. Do you believe the best way to break the trend of doctors being reluctant to perform an FOV is with changing the attitudes with people currently in med school, or convince the AAO that an FOV is a safe remedy for floaters? I'm going to save that to the end also. Um, I'm going to answer that. The power is going to start with what we do here tonight. The whole reason that we're here tonight, or one of the reasons we're here tonight, is because there's no reliable information given to you either in the doctor's offices or coming from the AAO. As a board certified ophthalmologist and a retina specialist, we need more people like myself giving credible information out there to all the people that have problems. Just saying that you have a problem and you'll get used to it, as all of you know, that's insufficient. I think that's irresponsible in terms of being a physician. So I hope that answers it, and then obviously that gives you my point of view. Let me move forward a little bit with the slides, and then towards the end we should have plenty of time for questions. Next question is, what is a PVD? PVD stands for posterior vitreous detachment. It eventually occurs in everyone. That means that this is a natural event. It occurs more often as we get older. It occurs more often as we're nearsighted. But at some point, everybody, if we live long enough, will get a PVD. So this is a natural process. When the PVD occurs, it is commonly associated with the new development of floaters. What I have to tell you is that anybody that gets new floaters need to get checked out. You need to have a dilated eye exam to make sure that the new floaters are not related to a tear in the retina. In my opinion, vitrectomy is the sole operation or procedure that can successfully cure you or remove the floaters. What are the risks of FOV? What are the risks of vitrectomy? Well, quite frankly, the risks of any eye operation are blindness. The risks or the chances of this developing an FOV are very, very small. The chance of blindness from infection is probably less than one chance in 10,000. And if you compare that to the risk of infection that could be a result of cataract surgery, which is one chance in 2,000, this is a much safer procedure. Vitrectomy can cause retinal detachment, and the chance of that happening is probably about the same as cataract surgery. And the chance of that happening is about 1 to 2% of the time. So you've got a procedure, FOV or vitrectomy, however you want to call it, which is at least as safe as cataract surgery, or in terms of infection, safer. There also can be problems with cataract, and that's controversial. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. There may be problems with intraocular pressure, either high or low, but either one of those are short-lived. And you could get some bleeding, which occurs shortly after the operation, but that too is temporary and, in my opinion, quite benign. Does FOV cause cataracts? The question really is, if there are pre-existing cataracts, does their formation increase after FOV? The answer might be yes. I think if by making global statements that vitrectomy causes cataracts, I think that's unfair, because there really is no good study or evidence that says that FOV only is related to cataract formation. If you recall, in the beginning of this webinar, I said that vitrectomy is the basic operation that retina specialists use to cure or to treat a lot of retinal problems. We fix retinal detachments, we remove blood, we remove epiretinal membranes, fix macular holes, remove floaters, etc., all with the basic operation called vitrectomy. Some of these procedures are quite complicated. They can take hours to perform. Sometimes we have to inject gas. The length of surgery is definitely related to cataract formation, as is the use of gas in the eye after the operation. So if you ask the question, does vitrectomy cause cataracts, I would have to say yes. But if you refine that, question to ask, does FOV cause cataracts? I would have to say it probably does not. If you have pre-existing cataracts at the time of cataract surgery, uh, at the time of vitrectomy, perhaps that will hasten it. But I think for the short 5 to 10 minutes that this takes, you're not subjecting yourself to any factors that are going to increase cataract formation. Uh, Objectively, there are no good studies or no studies that show that FOV only influences cataract formation. Look at it more practically. Everybody gets cataracts. It's just like gray hair. Some people get them older, some people get them later. If you are plagued with a problem that's causing visual loss and it's curable, such as floaters, getting cataracts I don't think is that much of a big deal, because as we age, we all get them. I just received this slide yesterday morning from my friend Mark Erickson, who owns Jira Designs, and he probably makes the best illustrations in the world for ophthalmology. And this is a nice illustration about what a cataract is. The cataract is this yellow or brown M&M shaped structure that is just behind the iris. And with time, well, when we're born, this area is crystal clear. It lets light in and things get focused on our retina really nicely. With time, the lens can get yellow or brown and it can cause decreased vision. So what we're really talking about is, does the FOV cause this to happen more frequently in patients that have the operation versus not have the operation? My point is, you're going to get this anyway. You don't know when it's going to happen. You've got a procedure that's highly curative. I think vitrectomy is a very likely cure, uh, and really doesn't influence the development of cataracts much at all, if any. I'm just going to keep up with the slides. There's just a few more. I can see the questions are mounting. Unless anyone has a huge objection, that's probably the most efficient way we can get through this. As we go through slides, certainly go ahead and keep asking your questions or typing them to put them in queue. This is a big question. What is frill? I'm going to tell you, I'm not 100% sure what it is, but I see it a lot in young people. Um, as you're aware, there are lots of people that have had the FOV and then they're complaining about frill. Um, First of all, frill is not a complication of FOV. I think frill is a realization or an appreciation for something that was pre-existing in addition to the floaters. As best I can define it, frill is residual vitreous, which is not optically clear, and it is the edge of the remaining vitreous that patients can see. There's a contrast between clear, perfect vision, which is now floater free, and the edge, usually off to the side, where there is a line of haze or shimmering of haze, which is described as frill. It's very difficult for me to confirm or refute the presence of frill, because all I can see is vitreous, and vitreous is supposed to be optically clear. It is because of this persistence of frill, especially in young patients, that I prefer now to induce a PVD. PVD may allow the most efficient removal of the vitreous. And to go back to the previous question about frill and why did I change, it is exactly because I think that young patients, not older patients with a PVD, but I think young patients have two problems. I think they've got an optically cloudy vitreous, and they also have floaters. Another frequent question that I get is, does previous retinal disease, like lattice degeneration, alter my candidacy for FOV? And generally speaking, not in most cases. Many people are concerned about the presence of lattice degeneration or having previous laser for retinal holes, having previous retinal detachment. That's very common. Patients have retinal detachments fixed, but for some reason they are left with a lot of floaters afterwards. Patients with diabetes certainly are still good candidates for having an FOV. So, in general, my answer is previous retinal disease does not obviate your candidacy to have FOV. Questions about logistics. If you're coming out of state or out of the country, you probably should plan on spending 2 or 3 days in the Washington, D.C. area. We can see you as soon as the day before surgery. We can operate the next day. I like to see you one day after. If you want to stay in town for a couple of weeks, I'd be happy to see you. Most of my patients that come from out of town usually leave Saturday or Sunday, having had the operation on Friday. In most cases, patients can return, most of my patients can return to full activity by 48 hours. And yes, because I don't use intraocular gas, there's no reason why you can't fly or drive through mountains shortly after surgery. Many patients have been evaluated by the few people that perform YAG laser for floaters. And many of you, or I see many of these patients, or I see many of you that have been denied YAG laser because the floaters are in the premacular bursa. And as I spoke earlier, this is not a concern for vitrectomy. Vitrectomy should be able to remove all the floaters because it's a completely different mechanism. A YAG laser focuses power to cut or blow or emulsify or cut up the floaters in the vitreous. This focused energy is dangerous if the focal point gets closer and closer to the retinal surface. So the fear of the 3 or 4 doctors that do this YAG laser is that they could directly cause retinal damage. And this just simply is not an issue with vitrectomy. Vitrectomy uses suction and basically suction and cutting to grasp and remove the vitreous so that we're able to remove anything even off the surface of the retina without damaging it. Is intraocular gas used in FOV? There are some people around the country that use air or gas routinely after a 25 gauge vitrectomy. I don't understand why this is done. I don't do it because I think it's unnecessary. And again, this is why I advocate that flying afterwards is completely safe. Um, what's changed since my last webinar is my feeling about PVD. I think that if you are young, and I'm just going to arbitrarily say less than 40 years old, I now favor creating a PVD during the vitrectomy. And the reason is that this frill issue is significant. Again, frill is not a complication of FOV. I think it's something that a patient appreciates. Now having the floaters removed, you now realize, wow, my vitreous is not optically clear. During the operation, my intent is to separate the posterior vitreous off that should say retinal surface. That's this is a typo, sorry. Um, eh, bear with me, getting old. Hmm. Okay, so back to inducing a PVD. I think that it's better for a young person because of the chance of frill. Older patients who have a PVD and floaters, in my opinion, are completely different than the younger patient who has floaters and has a risk of developing frill. In my practice of over 22 years, in patients in whom I've done a vitrectomy for years and years, vitrectomy for other reasons, I've never ever had the complaint of frill. The technique is absolutely the same. So the only possible explanation that I have at this time is that in certain young patients, the vitreous is actually different. The reason I didn't advocate PVD in the beginning is that in general with older patients in a PVD, there's no reason obviously to create a PVD. In Intuitively, there's no reason to create a PVD if you're removing most of the vitreous and you're making the assumption that the vitreous is optically clear. I think in certain segments of the population, the vitreous is not optically clear. So therefore, removing the PVD allows removing more of the vitreous and hence more chances of not having a patient with frill. The problem is, in theory, there's an increased risk of creating a tear in the retina, and perhaps you double that chance to about 2% instead of 1%. The advantage is you probably get most of the vitreous and therefore decrease the development of frill. One of the last questions that commonly comes up is ocriplasmin. It was FDA approved within the last 18 months. It is an injectable drug that chemically induces a PVD. It's an intraocular injection given in the office. For existing floaters, I do not think this injection has any merit. For patients with existing floaters, it may move the floaters and it may possibly put them in a place in the eye where they're less problematic. I get lots of questions as to my doctor says I already have a PVD, but he wants to give me this injection for the floaters. Well, the only purpose of this drug is to induce or create a PVD. If you already have a PVD, I'm not so sure this is going to change your life. You also have to ask yourself, what is the risk of the injection versus doing nothing or versus vitrectomy? And the risk of an injection in the office is about as safe as cataract surgery, whereas the risk of infection in vitrectomy is less. So if you're going to have one event or you're going to do one procedure, I'm not so sure there's any attraction for patients with floaters and ocriplasmin. Um, that is the end of my prepared lecture. I think that what I'd like to do is go through questions, and I will try and stay online until I answer most, if not all of them. Okay, now I'm going to answer Richard's question. Does pressure return to normal and stay normal? The answer to that is yes. After the vitrectomy, pressure is expected to be normal by usually the next morning, definitely 48 hours afterwards. So intraocular pressure is not an issue with modern vitrectomy. Question from Terry. Big question that most being brought up no is frill. Terry, could you ask that question again? I don't quite understand. Maybe I answered that with the slide on frill. Cheryl asks, what is the best size instrument? It's 27 gauge. How does one make sure the vitreous removed close to the lens? First of all, 27 gauge is not available in the United States. I think 25 gauge is more than adequate. 25 gauge is certainly much safer and has fewer complications, which is why we're actually here tonight. 25 gauge really revolutionized vitrectomy and has allowed us to operate very safely, especially in the area of retinal tears. The smaller gauge may be better, but for some reason Alcon has delayed the introduction of it. It was supposed to be introduced in November 2013. It may not be introduced for another year. The salespeople say that the reason this isn't being introduced is because they can't fulfill all the needs for the 25 gauge. I personally don't. I am not excited about 27 gauge being available. Uh, I'm because I think 25 gauge may actually be kind of the best of all possible worlds in terms of safety, speed, efficacy, etc. Noel asks, I was told there's a 100% chance of getting cataracts within 2 years of vitrectomy. Um, I don't think that's true at all. Again, I've been operating for over 22 years for all sorts of cases, including FOV, and most patients do not get cataract surgery or need cataract surgery 2 years within 2 years of vitrectomy. So I just think that is a misstatement, if there's such a thing. Another case of bad information. Richard says, I had 3 doctors tell me do not ruin a healthy eye. It's very dangerous. And I understand that. I've heard that so many times, and so have all of you. The point of the matter is, though, that I bet you the same doctors that told you not to ruin a healthy eye would tell you to have cataract surgery if your problems were caused by cataracts. What I've obviously written about and can speak about freely is that modern day vitrectomy, unbeknownst to many, 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 and most doctors, and even many retinal specialists, modern day 25 gauge vitrectomy is as safe or safer than cataract surgery. Cataract surgery, on the other hand, is the most popular procedure performed in the whole world. So that when patients say or that their doctors tell them not to ruin a healthy eye or that the complication rate is astronomical, I think those doctors clearly are uninformed. Richard asks, Doctor, I'm 44, farsighted, and I got first floaters in September 2013. Now I have many in both eyes. Is this normal? Well, Richard, I can't tell through a webinar. Um, it is normal to have, it can be normal to have floaters, but floaters can also be a sign of disease. So I can't answer that question, but would urge you to see your eye doctor and get his or her opinion about the health of your eye. If the floaters are there, but there are no health issues, then I would say if they're bothering your vision, then you need to seek some restitution. Doris asks, I have what I've been told is a Weiss ring in my vision after a PVD, which occurred naturally. I agree. I was told within 18 months I would have a PVD in my other eye. Maybe, maybe not. It's been 2 years and I see no Weiss ring in the other eye. Why is that? I would say both eyes age at the same rate. I would say that you are lucky. I would also say that not every PVD is visible. So you could have a PVD with a Weiss ring. You may have a PVD in the other eye and just not be aware of it. Hey, Carlos, you asked if retinal detachment occurs, is it detected and fixed during the FOV procedure? Retinal detachments generally do not occur during the time we are operating. What can be diagnosed during the operation is a tear in the retina. Tears in the retina cause retinal detachments. So I can fix any tear during the operation. Once in a while, tears develop afterwards. Once in a while, tears develop and they go undiagnosed. And that's why the chance of retinal tears causing a retinal detachment is so low after the operation. Ken asks, why is the risk of infection blindness so high since theory why is the risk of infection or blindness so high? It's actually low. So high since theoretically it isn't intraocular. The vitrectomy is intraocular because you're sticking instruments into the vitreous. The chance of it is one chance in 10,000. So you have one chance in 10,000 of getting a blinding infection. The chance of this happening in cataracts is one chance in 2,000. So given those numbers, vitrectomy is 5 times safer. John asks, I've had floaters possibly from a PVD, possibly from trauma, and they're playing havoc on my lifestyle. I live in Canada and have been told there's nothing they can do about it. I live in a stressful, annoying environment every day because of them, and it's affecting my daily activities, most importantly, my family. Because my eye is healthy, most surgeons will not operate. What are your thoughts on this? Well, hopefully you've been able to figure out, and by my email to you this morning, I think it was, that I think if you have no disease, eye disease, that you'd be a perfect candidate for having a vitrectomy. I emailed you this morning and we went over the risks. The risks are incredibly low, especially if you compare it to cataract surgery. It's lower than cataract surgery. So that when doctors tell you that the risk of complications is 35%, which is I think what you quoted me in your email, I just think that's ridiculous and irresponsible. There's nothing else I can say about that. The risk of infection and the risk of retinal tears are not my opinion. Those are those are national statistics. So it's nothing I'm making up or nothing I'm being biased about. Paul asks, are there any additional risks inducing a PVD? And Paul, I think the biggest risk is obviously a tear. I suppose I think the biggest risk is just the chance of a tear forming. There's probably some things that could happen 1 in a million, but nothing that you would normally routinely worry about, or at least from my perspective. Scott asks, wouldn't recent studies done that the vitreous consumes oxygen indicate that cataract acceleration is unavoidable? Scott, first of all, this is not a study. It is someone's theory as to why vitrectomy might cause cataract formation. If you look at those quote unquote studies, those were all what we call retrospective studies. Retrospective means like looking over your shoulder. The best studies and ones that the FDA and what we do so strongly in America are what we call randomized prospective. The weakness in the reports where vitrectomy causes cataract formation is that number one, they're retrospective. Number two, they're also accounting for vitrectomies performed for other reasons. Remember, if vitrectomies were performed for floaters by everybody, if it were not a rare event where a doctor would perform FOV, then you guys wouldn't be here. The fact of the matter is most doctors, if not all doctors, won't perform an FOV. But yet, how can you have a study that includes FOV if no one does them? And that's why I think this argument is actually just kind of a vicious cycle, and it's unfounded. If there were a study, and maybe there is, and I'm wrong, and someone can point out to me, where you had 200 patients which were randomized, meaning they had vitrectomy or didn't have vitrectomy, and they were blinded to the examiners as to whether or not the procedure was done and monitored for cataract formation, that would be a lot more compelling. But to have anecdotal evidence that says cataracts seem to be associated with vitrectomy, and the only explanation is, well, maybe vitrectomy causes cataract formation, and the only mechanism might be that vitrectomy or vitreous consumes oxygen, that's all conjecture, and it's a theory. But there's not been any compelling evidence that says that associates FOV with cataract formation. Cheryl says, my vitrectomy caused my cataract. Well, I don't know your exact situation. You may have had a vitrectomy. You may have had cataract beforehand. If the surgeon um, hits your lens with his instruments, that can cause cataract also. If the surgeon used air or gas after the vitrectomy, that can cause cataracts also. Um, so maybe one of those three things happened. Um, I'm assuming that if you got cataract, you may have had the cataract removed, and probably your vision should have been restored. Joel asks, are there increased risk with previously done ICL surgery? I would say no, because the ICL, that's the intraocular contact lens or implanted contact lens, which is used for nearsighted patients. That device is in front of the lens. Vitrectomy is performed behind the lens. And hold on just a second. When we're doing a vitrectomy, the instruments are placed in the vitreous. This is your lens. The ICL should be implanted in front of the lens. So we're operating in an area which is far away from this area. Here's the instruments doing the vitrectomy. The ICL would be up here, so there really shouldn't be any reason why the ICL should be a contraindication to doing vitrectomy. Courtney asks, to your knowledge, do vitrectomies in a younger patient typically have better or worse outcomes? I think they have just as good outcomes, if any, maybe slightly worse because of frill. But I think we've come up with ways to reduce the incidence of frill. And again, frill, in my opinion, is not a complication. I've got some patients out there that are they're all consumed with the development of frill, but the idea of the operation is to reduce or remove floaters. And yes, indeed, they've got fewer or no floaters. How dangerous, Cheryl asks, is inducing a PVD? The biggest danger, again, is the chance of creating a tear in the retina, which is, let's just say, is about 1%, 2% at most. The audio, I hopefully, is not cutting in and out anymore because I'm not shouting. Susan says, good evening, Dr. Wong. I had a vitrectomy for retinal detachment, but still I have plenty of floaters. I don't know why, so I can have another vitrectomy for the remaining floaters. Thank you. The answer is absolutely. Eric says, so in all cases, not all of the vitreous is removed. In all cases, there is always some vitreous that's removed. The vitreous is attached to the retina in certain areas. It's very adherent towards the front of the eye. It is less adherent towards the back, so that towards the front there is always some vitreous left, usually off to the side. We try to clear this visual axis or this V-shaped cone as much as possible. If we induce a PVD, we get to remove most of the vitreous on the side. You can never completely remove all the vitreous. Richard asks, don't thank you, Richard. Don't tell us you're getting old. We need you around a long time. I'm getting old. We all do. It's problems with memory and functioning, but I plan to be around for quite a while. Thank you. Um, Richard asks again, if you don't mind, if you don't get a PVD, can a PVD happen and cause more floaters down the road? This is a tough question to answer online, but if you have an operation where a PVD is not induced, can you get a PVD later on down the road? In theory, yes, but less likely, or when you get older. The reason is that most of the vitreous has been removed, so that there will be fewer forces to actually cause the PVD. It's very hard to explain, but if the vitreous occupies most of the eye, but now you've removed most of the central vitreous, there's a very thin lining of vitreous left on the retina. Because the vitreous has been debulked, it's my opinion that it's less likely for this small layer of vitreous to pull away from the surface of the retina anytime soon. Carlos asks, how do I induce a PVD? You use the suction from this apparatus to actually vacuum or start to gently pull the vitreous off the surface of the retina. Let me see. I think I've learned that these arrows don't work. Okay, so here is the vitreous coming off the surface of the retina. And what I can do with my surgical instruments is I can pull on this surface and bring the vitreous this way, and it will increase this gap here. And then it's very easy for me to cut away most of the remaining vitreous. The problem is that anytime you pull on the vitreous, there is the theoretic chance that you're pulling on the vitreous in such a way that you can cause a tear in the retina. Terry asks, what about age 44 for PVD? I assume you asked, is age 44 too young to have a PVD? And my answer is no, not in any way at all. Cheryl asks, I had FOV in left eye with cataract surgery 3 months later. Lens replacement made me hyperopic. What is your thoughts on piggyback lens? Wow, this is a really tough question. I don't know your exact scenario. I would first favor getting a second opinion and possibly just removing the implant and putting another implant in. But I'm not a cataract surgeon, but that would be my first thought. Obviously, then this is another question we could have had on the webinar tonight. Vitrectomy or FOV should not change your refractive status. It shouldn't make you more hyperopic or nearsighted. And in cases or in patients where that's blamed, I'd question how well or how accurate the implant for your cataract surgery was calculated. Cheryl says left eye has haze and Weiss ring, waiting for right eye to be fixed before going forward with FOV in a right eye. Probably pretty good advice or pretty good outlook, because I think that I always try, if there's multiple problems between two eyes, you fix one eye first before worrying about problems in the other. Worst case scenario is you've got two sight-threatening problems in two different eyes, and I'm not so sure I ever want to entertain that situation. Richard, if you have an autoimmune disease in the eye, can you still do an FOV? The answer is yes. The only autoimmune disease I would worry about are autoimmune diseases which you have significant uveitis or chronic uveitis. But still, I think that we could pre-treat you and treat you more heavily with immunosuppressants or steroids afterwards to limit the problems with that. John asks, what criteria do I use to determine if someone with floaters is a good candidate? Also, can I be given an anesthetic to be completely out during surgery? The biggest criteria that I use is that you need to tell me that whatever you're seeing, regardless of shape, blackness, density, etc., whatever you're seeing is moving to and fro. Because floaters in the vitreous are the only thing in the eye that can cause a visual disturbance that moves to and fro with eye movement, because these are opacities that are suspended in a gel. The other criteria is you can't be crazy. You need to be of sound mind and understand the risks and benefits of surgery, because I have some liability by forming this doctor-patient relationship. So basically, you've got to answer the questions about movement with eye movement, and that you've got to be coherent to understand the informed consent. And then I guess the third criteria is that you've got to be free of any disease, where I think that the problem is really from the disease and not floaters, such as diabetes, etc. I had my first surgery with Dr. Wong in November 2011 and do not have a cataract. Thank you, John. And thank you also for spreading the word on some of the forums recently. Richard, a modest question. Do you consider yourself the Michael Jordan of FOV? Um, no, I think I am a tremendous spokesman. Um, I don't think I could have been online 10 or 15 years ago. I've done enough vitrectomy that I have complete confidence in the way I practice and what I do. And without that confidence, I don't think I think I'd be more reluctant to put myself out there with my websites and having webinars. At 53 years old and been in practice now 23 years, and as my kids will tell you, I'm not short on self-confidence. Um, I'm very sure of what I tell you. I've been doing this a long time, and I have no reason to jeopardize what I've achieved by talking about this openly. The other part of your question is there's nothing special I do other than going out of my way to educate and to form relationships with you so that we can actually help you. Elon asks, my son is 24 years old and has floaters. Is there anything we can do today? What you can do today is write our number down and call tomorrow, and maybe we can get him seen. I have done, my youngest patients to date are 16, 17, and 18 years old. For me to see them, just to examine them, I will need you present because they're minors. And I'll need consent to at least examine them. And if we need to proceed with surgery, obviously I need your permission, or whoever operates on your son will need your consent. Eric asks, Dr. Wong, are you familiar with something called retinal stray light? I've read studies that correlate floaters, vitreous opacities with an increased level of stray light, which in turn cause patients, in addition to floaters, increased glare, starburst, and other visual issues. Just curious what you knew about that. Thanks for the great webinar. Eric, thanks for following me for so long. Thanks for joining in tonight. And no, I don't know anything about stray light. When you have a chance, forward me a link and maybe I can get a little bit better informed. Eric asks, what is a Weiss ring and is this a risk of FOV? A Weiss ring is what a doctor can see when they look in the eye, and it is the old separation or the place of attachment where the vitreous is attached to your optic nerve. The optic nerve is round, so when the vitreous pulls away, you have a kind of a demarcation or round demarcation where the vitreous used to be attached to the optic nerve. It's a sign or clue that you've had a PVD. It has no impact whatsoever in terms of the success or failure of an FOV. Doris asks, something similar as a Weiss ring, easy to remove? And absolutely, older patients with PVD and Weiss rings, you are absolutely the easiest because the vitreous is already separated off the retina, and I think that you have an isolated problem where you only see floaters and you don't have these issues with a non-clear vitreous. Terry asks, is a PVDA a choice for you, or do I decide? That's something you and I will discuss if I ever have the privilege of meeting you. I will give you my opinion after I look at you and determine whether or not we should induce a PVD. Ruth asks, is there a specific intensity or number of floaters that there needs to be in order to be a candidate for this surgery? No, I cannot see all the floaters that plague you. If I have the privilege of examining you, I will not actually try and figure out which floaters are bothering you the most, because the vitreous is supposed to be optically clear. Um, Therefore, I can see things that you can't see, meaning I may see floaters that actually don't bother you. And that's why I go back to the fact that if whatever you're seeing moves to and fro, well, then it can only be in the vitreous, and removing the vitreous should be helpful. Richards asks, are there more doctors starting to realize that floaters are more of a problem and starting to do more to help sufferers? I think the answer is yes. I'm going to be speaking globally. I'm going to be speaking at a meeting in Florida in February, and I've been asked to talk about floaters. I'm not so sure lots of people will be doing it quickly, but the answer to your question is I think more doctors, albeit few, are becoming more sympathetic. John asked, why are doctors in Canada so uneducated about the effects of floaters? The payment system is completely different in Canada, for from what I understand. They have there's more of a socialized system where they are paid a flat rate to do um, an undefined amount of work. So therefore, it's been my understanding that doctors in these settings have no incentive to do yet another operation. So they try to do as few operations as possible, perhaps telling you or quoting you rates as high as 35%. At the very least, you're not going to bother them again. John states that some doctors will base their decision on the number of floaters. Um, that's their criteria. I don't understand it. Uh, as far as I'm concerned, you've got something bothering you in your vision. How can I possibly appreciate a qualitative statement and make it a quantitative um, problem? That may be their decision. I see no basis in that. Joel says, I recently had surgery to repair a tear caused by a PVD. I'm 43. Are there any increased risks? I also have lattice degeneration, but otherwise my eyes are healthy. Actually, there's no reason why you can't have a PVD, and the lattice degeneration has nothing to do with it. Perhaps if you've got there really just isn't any reason, either your age or the lattice is going to preclude you from having a vitrectomy. Can vitrectomy cause a scar? Asked Susan. I don't really know what you mean by scar, but I would say no. Paul asks, how many patients have I done or have I induced a PVD since I decided starting inducing? Um, I don't know the numbers, but I would say probably 75 to 90% young patients. I now induce a PVD. What happens to saline solution injected in the eye? What replaces the vitreous? Asked Joel. The vitreous is replaced at the time of surgery. The vitreous is removed and replaced by a saline solution. That artificial saline solution is replaced within 24 to 48 hours by your natural saline. You go from having an eye with vitreous and your natural saline to an eye with just mostly saline. We do not need the vitreous once we're born. Cheryl says, my floater started in October 2011. This past year, 2013, after my left eye vitrectomy, I now have blepharitis in both eyes. What can I do about this? Are there antibiotics that can take care of this problem? Sorry, but it's like a phlegm in the corner of my eye. Blepharitis is not caused by vitrectomy. Blepharitis is very similar to dandruff. It is chronic inflammation of the eyelids or the skin, and it is a chronic problem without cure, meaning there are no antibiotics to take it to get rid of it. It is something you manage. If the symptoms get worse or bad, there are things that you can do, such as uh, compresses or eye drops, what have you, depending on your severity, which may help alleviate the symptoms, but there is no cure. Courtney says, what is your opinion as to why other doctors and colleagues of yours do not educate themselves as you have in order to offer their patients a solution or hope? This is a really, really complicated answer. I have my wife Amy and I have started a business um, which basically teaches doctors to blog. The reason we're in this business is because I have learned how important it is to basically be transparent online about how I practice and who I am, um, as a way to basically educate patients and, quite frankly, market. Most of the doctors that are still in practice today are of the old practice under the old scarcity uh, marketing model. The scarcity marketing model says that if you're the only restaurant in town, you don't have to have the best food, you don't have to have the best hours, you don't have to have the best prices, etc., etc. Doctors for years and years and years, for generations and generations, built their practices on the scarcity model. In that, answers to health related questions or health information was scarce. Doctors simply had to open the door and patients would come because they were the only source of information. Fast forward to the year 2014, you now have because of the internet, you now have an educated demographic, or your patients are now more knowledgeable. Doctors are unwilling, most doctors in my experience are unwilling to appreciate that. I think that more and more doctors over the next couple of years have got to become more transparent, have got to have websites where they're educational, have got to have webinars instead of lectures and town halls, et cetera, because that's what you, our patients, deserve and demand. Um, so it's more of a generational issue. Um, Doctors are very conservative. Um, I think with time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to find that the newer generation of doctors are more willing to share their knowledge openly. I hope that was some help and not confusing. Scott says, have you ever had globe penetration occur while doing the block injection? I've had two that I'm aware of in highly nearsighted people. Neither person was aware of it because it didn't cause any problems. Um, and this is out of probably 20,000 operations. Uh, Don asks, what about remaining vitreous left behind the lens? Can that detach later and cause more floaters? No, it's not the vitreous detaching itself that causes the floaters. It's the degeneration of the vitreous, and it's the posterior hyaloid or the posterior face of the vitreous that causes most of the floaters. The vitreous behind the lens, I think, at present day, should be removed. Uh, it is unlikely. It is unlikely to detach from the or become separated from the lens because it is anchored to the retina just adjacent to the lens, or the anterior retina. It's one of those things that's hard to explain without giving you a model, and I just don't have one. Eric, one other question. What is the time span for post-op risk of retinal detachment? I've heard that 1% risk can be for 30 days, 6 weeks, 90 days, etc. In my experience, if you're going to detach after vitrectomy, it's going to happen within the first month. Joel's had a PVD in his right eye, which caused a retinal tear. Also seems well after surgery. What is the chance that my left eye also went through a PVD, which I didn't notice? I would say probably 50-50. It's quite possible that you've got a PVD and you just don't know it. Not everybody has floaters with a PVD. Not everyone's aware of a PVD. The best way that I'd say, have your doc take a look and, quite frankly, ask them. Chrissy, thanks for making a note about refractive states after FOV. Richard says, thank you, Dr. Wong. You're a great person helping sufferers, and thank you for your personal time. Richard, thank you for thanking me. Actually, everybody, thanks for joining in on this. I think this is probably the wave of the future. And obviously, for those of you who have joined me before, it's really valuable for me and for you. Joel asks, do you do both eyes at the same time or schedule them sometime apart? Never do them at the same time. You could have instruments that aren't clean. You could have uh, artificial saline or something that was where the whole batch was bad. Now you've operated on two eyes. Now what do you do? I am comfortable with doing a vitrectomy to two eyes over a 2 to 4 week span. Beyond retinal tears, asks Eric, and infection, are there any other risks detrimental to the quality of vision? I would say cataract formation caused by an inexperienced surgeon is possible, but I don't think it's permanently detrimental. So in that respect, no, because cataract surgery is so highly successful. I think as a retina specialist, what I fear most is retinal detachment and infection. Terry says, "Do we have to be awake at all during surgery?" I hear people so they watch the surgery. I don't know if I like that so much. Um, Everybody I operate on is usually awake, but you are consented so that if we have to put you to sleep because you just can't tolerate it, we can do so. I've really never had a situation where patients couldn't stand what was going on other than the fact they were having an operation. So I guess the answer is we take this case by case. If you don't think you can withstand, sedation, then certainly we can talk to the anesthesiologist and consider putting you to sleep for the entire operation. Cheryl says, I went to two different cataract surgeons. Both tests came out the same for the other type and the strength of the lenses to use. I later went to another surgeon who said that when one has FOV, it is better to go a bit more myopic with the lens, and this will more than likely get you at zero if that's what was intended. I came out plus 150, intending to be at zero. Yeah, that from what you say, it's not a common problem. What I'm usually faced with is um, patients getting cataract surgery eventually. Generally, we don't have to worry about the presence or presence or absence of vitreous. Um, your story may be a little specific. It kind of makes sense as to what was said and what happened, but that's not the usual. And I would imagine it's a little bit frustrating being left 1.50 hyperopic. Our intent generally is to make patients 1.5 -1 or minus 1.5. Scott asks, are more doctors changing their minds about FOV as a legit and safe procedure? I don't think so. And again, I think mainly it's due to ignorance. Um, Katie says, thanks for the information. I have a few questions. Terry says, if you are Michael Jordan and Chrissy is the LeBron James of your staff, um, I've got three LeBron Jameses. I've got Bridget in one office, I've got Andrea in the other, and Chrissy takes care of me online. But thank you for that. Um, I'll have to be calling them all LeBron now. Susan says, thank you for this webinar. It's very helpful and informative. God bless you more. Susan, thanks very much. Don't forget, I'm going to do the same thing again on Sunday. So if you'd like to return, please feel free. Carlos says, if planning to get LASIK, should I do it before or after FOV? I don't think it matters. I think you take that particular situation which bothers you most and go for it. I do not believe FOV should change the measurements for the laser at all. Cheryl says, it's been almost a year since I had cataract surgery. Isn't this more dangerous to place the lens because the capsule is formed around the lens? This could easily tear and the lens could fall back in the eye, needing a retinal surgeon to remove it. Intraocular lens replacement is never fun, but I'm not so sure that the piggyback lens is a great answer either. But I don't do either of those procedures, so other than that statement, I would refer you to your cataract surgeon. Jim says, if you start to see an infection after FOV, what are the chances of saving vision if caught early? The chances are very good. We just have to be aware that infection occurs rapidly. The onset usually is within the first 2 to 6 days. If you get an infection, it does not necessarily mean you're going to go blind. I've had many patients we've successfully treated and see well. Katie says, I've had optic neuritis in the left eye with no major residual effects except uneven reaction in pupils in response to light. Is this a greater risk for FOV? No. Also, I've been on steroids for the last few years due to possible MS and nerve inflammation, um, optic neuritis and vestibular neuritis, but MS was ruled out due to MRI with and without contrast. Not a contraindication at all. Why are some floaters more mobile than others? Just because the floaters are probably located in more mobile areas of the eye where the vitreous is more fluid or more mobile. Joel says, does the consultation take place on the same trip? Yes, it can. You can come in on Thursday or Wednesday, and we operate on Friday, and you're out the door, back home, Saturday or Sunday. I'd be traveling across the country and don't want to make two trips if I don't need to. You don't need to. What you can do is call any of my LeBron Jameses, Bridget, Andrea, or Chrissy. Set up an appointment and reserve a time for surgery. If for some reason during the appointment you and I decide surgery is not in your best interest, we simply cancel surgery the next day and you're on your way. If we think we need to proceed with surgery, we're already reserved in the OR. We'll operate on a Friday usually, and after your post-op on visit on Saturday, in most situations you can go home. Richard says, my time well spent. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Katie says, family history, father had retinal tear and grandmother had macular degeneration. Create any sort of increased risk for me to have the FOV? No, I'm always wary of retinal tears, and that would be related to the retinal tear your dad had. Probably you're as nearsighted as he is, but we take that into account. The macular degeneration doesn't matter. Doris says, thank you, Dr. Wong, for speaking up for those of us that are plagued with this constant interruption in our vision. I cannot go outside without wearing sunglasses. I wish insurance would cover this. Insurance covers cataract surgery, doesn't it? Call LeBron, either Chrissy LeBron, Andrea LeBron, or Bridget LeBron. To my understanding, in the United States, insurance covers vitrectomy. John says, thank you so much for answering my questions. I look forward to meeting you soon. I look forward to meeting you, John. A couple more questions. Do you use dye to make sure you get all the vitreous, and can I be completely out for this procedure? You can absolutely be completely out. If I need to use dye like Brilliant Blue or ICG, perhaps. I'll only use it if necessary. I try to reduce my operating time and will only use it if necessary, but it's easily done. Ruth says, I have floaters in both eyes. You do surgery on one eye at a time. Yes, that's correct. How long do you suggest to wait until the other surgery the other eye? Perhaps 2 to 4 weeks. How long does surgery last and what's the recovery like? Surgery is less than 15 minutes in most cases. Recovery is simply drops. After 48 hours, most patients of mine are surprised how simple this turned out to be. Paul says, I would think it would be a benefit to have an FOV if your vitreous is degenerating. I agree. Vitreous only causes problems. It seems a natural PVD causes serious problems. It doesn't create it. The whole world of retinal surgery is based upon vitreous. The vitreous is implicated in every operation I do. So yes, you're right, Paul. If we didn't have a vitreous, you really wouldn't have any problems. One more question. I'm nearsighted. How would that affect the procedure? Says John. Overall, it won't affect the procedure. Chrissy, my LeBron Chrissy would like to state insurance covers this surgery. Most policies belong to people located in the U.S., just so people know that the financial aspect isn't an issue. There you go, from LeBron herself. Ken says cataract surgeons are not friendly either when you tell them you've had an FOV. There are slight nuances to having cataract surgery with an FOV in terms of performing the procedure. There are tons of experienced cataract surgeons across the country which are experienced in doing vitrectomy, cataract surgery in patients with previous vitrectomy. Thank you, Randy, says Ken. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate your attendance and your participation. Chrissy says, thanks, Terry. John says, I thought you were the Peyton Manning of FOVs. Go Broncos. John, I don't think you're from that area of the country, if I remember. Uh, Courtney says, good night. I have to head out. We'll be in touch. Great. Eric says, what are the chances of vision loss with a retinal tear detachment? Very, very small. Andrea is saying, don't forget me. I'm Andrea LeBron. Joel says, what are the costs per eye, if you don't mind me asking? Why don't you go ahead and email me, if you don't mind, and I will have one of my LeBrons answer you on email. Here's my contact information. I'm going to wind this up very shortly. Use this contact information to just email me up here or email Chrissy about financial issues. Coming from Canada, will doctors be educated enough to deal with the aftercare? Absolutely. There shouldn't be a concern of that at all. Richard asks, do I use Connecticut insurance? I have no idea. Again, ask Chrissy, Andrea, or Bridget. Do you think the new YAG laser being marketed directly for floaters by Alex is a good sign of floater awareness? I think it's a good sign of floater awareness, but there's a reason that there's only 3 people that in the United States, maybe 4, market themselves to treat floaters with YAG. None of them are retina specialists. If that were truly an effective treatment, I think it would be covered. I think it would be covered by insurance, which it's not. I would think that retina specialists would be performing the procedure, but they don't. So I think it may be a good thing, but I think the real basis is the YAG procedure safe? In my opinion, it's ridiculous. And I don't know about the guy doing it in Florida. Carlos, thank you for thanking me. Cheryl, same to you. I look forward to you seeing Sunday. Again, for those of you that are still online, which is most of you, as a favor to me, go to vitrectomyforfloaters.com, subscribe by email, and you'll get whatever writings I have or postings, so we can kind of all keep up to date. It's my hope that this can be a forum where I can participate in legitimately. I'm very hesitant to participate in your floater forums because I think that's kind of your space. So I created this website so I could have a space to kind of communicate with you directly. This is my email. As most of you know, I'm completely amenable to receiving emails. These are phone numbers to contact either LeBron Andrea or LeBron Bridget. And online, this is LeBron Chrissy's email address. Again,